At 19, Clara May Whitlock had never known a day of her life beyond the rust-colored fences of her father's worn-out farm in the dry valleys of Texas, where the wind always seemed to carry dust and prayers in equal measure. She was the youngest of 6, quiet, soft-spoken, and so untouched by the world that her innocence was more a part of her than her name, a sort of light that shone in her eyes even when she didn't smile, which was often these days, for her family was poor, her father's debts piling higher than the haystacks in winter, and when old Mr. Tanner from the next county offered to take her hand in marriage to his nephew, a poor but honest farmer named Eli Tanner, her father agreed without even asking her heart's consent, believing a safe roof and steady bread was more valuable than the foolish notions of young love. Clara didn't protest, for she had been raised to obey, and though her heart trembled as the wagon rolled through the long trails toward the Tanner homestead, she prayed silently that God would grant her peace in this new life she had not chosen. The land Eli owned was humble, a small house with a porch leaning slightly to one side, a barn with missing boards, and wide open fields that looked more like wilderness than crops. But he greeted her with eyes that were calm and honest, a man hardened by work but softened by kindness, and when he tipped his hat and said, "You must be tired, Miss Clara," she felt something loosen in her chest, for his voice held no demand, only care. The wedding had been simple, a preacher from town, 2 witnesses, a Bible, and the golden hush of the setting sun casting light on their joined hands. But that night, when the vows were done and the world expected her to be a wife in every sense, Eli did something that no one in her world had ever done before. He told her she could sleep in peace, that he wouldn't touch her until she trusted him with her heart, and when she looked up in confusion, expecting him to claim what her father had sold away, he only smiled faintly and said, "You ain't a thing to be owned, Clara. You're a woman, and a woman ought to have a choice." The words, simple as they were, broke something inside her, a quiet disbelief that someone would see her as more than a transaction, and tears fell onto her hands before she even realized she was crying. Eli turned away and gave her the small bed, taking a blanket to sleep by the dying fire, his back to her so she could rest without fear, and that night she lay awake listening to the crickets and the soft rhythm of his breathing, realizing for the first time that gentleness was stronger than any force she'd known. Days turned into weeks, and slowly Clara began to find her place on the Tanner farm. She learned to milk the cow named Bessie, to mend fences alongside Eli, to hang laundry where the breeze could catch it, and though she still blushed when his eyes lingered too long, she began to smile when he did, because in his gaze she saw not possession but partnership. He never raised his voice, never hurried her. He built her a swing from a sturdy oak branch near the field and carved her name into the wood, saying every woman deserved a place to feel like a child again. And when she asked him once why he was so kind when life had been so unkind to him, he simply said, "Because kindness is what turns a hard life into a livable one." There were storms that year, real ones and silent ones, when crops failed and money grew tight, when loneliness crept in like the chill at dawn, and once, when her father came begging for a loan, Eli gave him half their winter feed without a word of blame. Clara stood by the door and watched, her heart swelling with a love she didn't yet have words for, and that night she stitched a small quilt for him, embroidered with tiny stars, to thank him for teaching her what it meant to give without expectation. Months passed, and when spring came, the fields blossomed as if the land itself had forgiven them both. She woke early to help him plant corn, her hands blistered but her spirit light, and sometimes, when he caught her humming to the soil, he'd stop and just watch her, quietly, as though the sight of her was a kind of prayer answered. One evening, when the sky was painted in gold and purple, Eli brought her to the same porch where she had first stepped down from the wagon, and he said softly, "Clara, I'd like to court you proper, if you'll let me." She laughed through tears, because they were already husband and wife by law, but she understood, he was asking for her heart now, not her hand, and in that moment, she nodded, because she knew she loved him, not because duty demanded it but because love had grown like wildflowers through the cracks of her fear. Their first true kiss came not under candlelight but under a sky full of stars, after months of patience and quiet understanding, and when his lips touched hers, she felt the world steady, as though every wrong turn in her life had led her to that gentle certainty. The neighbors began to whisper about them, the poor couple who seemed richer than anyone else, the farmer who treated his wife like treasure, but Clara no longer cared for the world's talk. She was too busy building a home with laughter and prayer, too busy watching Eli teach a stray colt to trust human touch, too busy finding the rhythm of life beside a man who understood that love was not taken, but earned. The years rolled like slow rivers through dry country. Sometimes they faced drought, sometimes plenty, but always together, and when the seasons turned, Clara realized she had become strong without even noticing, her hands rough, her heart steady, her eyes bright with hope. One autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching the horizon bleed orange and red, Eli placed his weathered hand over hers and said, "You've made this house a home, Clara May." She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "You made me believe I could." In that quiet twilight, they sat without words, just the sound of the wind moving through the wheat, and though the world beyond their little farm kept on turning with all its noise and sin, within their fence lines there was peace, the kind born of forgiveness, faith, and a love that never needed to prove itself. And so, the poor farmer who had once shocked a 19-year-old bride by giving her freedom instead of demand became the richest man in all the West, not by gold or land, but by the heart of the woman who had learned, at last, that being loved gently was the greatest miracle of all.